Deborah, I'm going to start at the end. There is a credit, the final credit we see about this film inspired by Patrick Perkins. Can you tell us who that person is and how he inspired this film?
Yeah, I was volunteering in a local public school. My mother had passed away. I was looking for something meaningful to do and to give back. And I met Patrick when he was 6 years old. He was a very bright, cheerful, positive person, already showing signs of leadership when he was 6. And as I was getting ready to go back to work and I was walking out the door, I asked the assistant teacher what Patrick's story was. And she told me he had been removed from his parents and he was living in an orphanage called Holly Grove, which happens to be an orphanage where Marilyn Monroe spent some time. And I had never encountered a foster youth or the foster care system, and I went home sobbing and resolved to continue to work with him, and I never left. It's been 25 years. He just turned 31, and I view him like my son, and he views me like his mother.
Deborah, the system has its strengths and it has its weaknesses, but something that the system also has is a respect for the privacy of the children who are in the foster care system. And that, as a filmmaker, would present, I suspect, some issues in terms of access. So, how do you work within the system to make sure that you have the trust of the system and that then you can identify the people that you want to follow? Because I suspect it doesn't take a couple of days, maybe a couple of months, maybe more than that.
Yeah, we were very lucky that the presiding judge of the Los Angeles County system believed in a transparent court. And he would always try to invite people in, and they wouldn't come, primarily journalists, but other people as well. So that was the first step. We CC'd 35 people on every media request to the court to have permission to film a child with an open case. And then we worked very closely with Children's Law Center, the law firm who represents all the children in the system, to make sure the privacy rights of the children were honored and respected, but also that the children understood what they were getting themselves into, particularly, I mean, obviously for Chrislyn, she's a newborn child, but in the case of Sydney and Denisha, they took a vote. We met Mrs. Beavers 2 years before we started filming, and they put a vote to the family, and Sydney and Denisha voted to be in the film. So it was very important to everybody that they understand that this material will live on.
Deborah is very hard to say no to. That's part of the way we got access. That she kept showing up. We kept showing up and saying that we wanted to make an accurate film, and we were not there to try to do an expose about the Department of Children and Family Services. We really wanted to understand the welfare system, and I think people after a time believed us.
And one of the aspects of that is that when Mark and I were first talking about doing the subject, that we felt that the way the subject is ordinarily depicted is at the time of a crisis, that the public gets their information when there's a fatality, and something that we can all agree is horrific and really disturbing, and that very often the press are investigative journalists. And we wanted to come from a different point of view because we felt that when the public gets their information in that way, they turn away in despair. And we wanted to turn that despair into engagement, if at all possible.
What were you looking for, and what were the challenges in shooting this film?
What we were looking for? We were looking for somebody who was really good. But when we first met Nick, and we're talking about, because this was very much an observational film.
Correct.
And we're intervening in very dramatic moments, we thought, and very intimate settings. And we asked Nick how he did that. And Nick said, well, I just kind of curl up in a ball and try to disappear.
He said he puts on a cloak of invisibility, and then he squatted down.
Really?
To show us.
And he vanished.
And he actually did appear to disappear. And the other great thing about Nick was that we filmed for 90 days, and Nick made a commitment and stuck with it, which is a really big deal. Over
That there's
the-
not a different person coming in to operate. And I'm going to, outside of the cloak of invisibility that you borrowed from Harry Potter, what does that mean in terms of how you shoot? What kind of crew you bring? How you light it? How small can you be? And how quickly do you realize that you have become invisible to the subjects?
I think I learned a valuable lesson one time. I was shooting a scene in a hotel room, and there was these people from Comic-Con, and they were counting up their money, and they were all celebrating because they had $50,000, and they put them in piles of thousands, and they were like 1, 2, 3, up to 25, and then they counted again, and counted again, and it's supposed to be 50, but there was only 25, and you could see there's 25 grand missing. And the atmosphere in the room completely changed. The producer left the room, went to the bathroom. The guy with the boom pole looked away, and I just crouched down really small, hoping they wouldn't see me. And then they continued with the scene, and then I realized they were accusing the people behind me that were literally just touching me. So then I had to just stand up and turn around and get a shot, and I went back down again. And no one said stop, so I was like, okay, that's my method now. So, and part of it is just hiding behind the camera. You just hide your face.
But you can see there's a great moment in the film, I think, that really attests to Nick's skill, is when the baby has a seizure. And Nick just holds still.
If in doubt, hold still. I think I learned that one. Just don't do anything. Just, that looks like that baby is not moving. Oh dear, that looks bad. And then hold still.
And it's interesting because then all the people move into the frame from outside. And so it's like basically a single take, cut up a little bit, but...
And Mark and I weren't in the room. The room was so small, and in order for Nick to get all around the room, we left the room.
Because you'd be in the shot.
Yeah.
So and so we were on headsets outside the door, and all of a sudden you heard what was going on.
Well, it went very silent. It went very silent, and everyone just looked at the baby. And I mean, you guys were outside, but you knew something serious was going on because the conversation just ended. And I mean, that thing, I just completely stood still. And at one point, if you look in that shot, there's the baby's, the bottle's kind of in front of his face, and I needed to be 2 inches higher, but to go 2 inches higher, I'd have to do one of those, a yoga pose. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to hold that for very long. So I just held it still again, because if I move and draw attention to myself, it changes the scene, and people might say, okay, you need to stop filming this because this baby looks in a bad way.
Kate, at what point do you start figuring out, in consultation with the director and your producer, about what are the stories, the people you're going to focus on, and how do you come up with a narrative where you feel that you can stay with somebody for a certain period of time and come back to somebody? How do you start an assembly on a movie like this? Because it seems monumental.
Yes, it was. Well, fortunately, when you have such incredible people to work with who are so compassionate and kind and create a space where people open up and there's trust there, the kind of material that we got it was incredible. You know, it was just so powerful. So one of the challenges is bringing it down. But I had an assistant, Bert Cornish, and another AE, Yongla Wong, who really helped to bring the material down. So they would give me long select scenes. And you kind of just go scene by scene, character by character, and putting each character's story together, and then looking for the intersections or the ways that one story informs another. Because I see a film like this with multiple people in it as like a relay race. Someone starts and then it's handed off to the next person and so forth. And so it's finding those connecting links and bringing it through. And I also always think in terms of a 3-act structure.
If you think about how this film, and I mean this truly, how it's cast, the kinds of stories that you want to tell within the limitations that you're facing, when you think about Jessica's story, Rayanne and Chris's story, Mary's story, Dasani's story, the mother of the year, Mrs. Beavers, what are you looking for, and how do you figure out why this is a good mix.
We made a decision to film entirely in Los Angeles County for a number of reasons. One, because we were all here, and if the stories were taking place across the country, we would not have been able to capture something like Chrysalin's seizure or some of the other incidents in the film. So there were economic interests and also access interests, but we never wanted this movie to we never wanted to suggest that this movie was about LA. We wanted archetypal stories that could take place anywhere across the country. So Chrysalin was meant to represent the earliest point at which a child can enter the system. So that was a newborn baby with a positive toxicology, and we got phone calls every day for 3 months from the hotline letting us know that another child had been born with drugs in their system. And if a story wasn't going to work out or wasn't quite right, very sadly, we knew that there would be another phone call within a very short period of time. We also wanted to show the other end of the spectrum, which was the youth aging out of the system, because not all states have extended care to 21, and for every year that a child gets to stay within the system beyond 18 years of age, it reduces the incidence of homelessness, drug addiction, pregnancy, early death, really serious consequences and outcomes for these children. Dasani's story was put on our radar by the Hilton Foundation, and Barbara Dewey says that line in the movie about in an intact family, if children acted out, that they would suffer consequences and be punished, but they wouldn't face charges. And then we felt a responsibility to show a good foster parent. We were going down a path with another woman, and we mentioned that to the Department of Children and Family Services, and they said, "You think she's great? You should meet Mrs. Beavers." So we were very happy to meet Mrs. Beavers. And then the final story was Jessica Chandler, who just had experienced so many different aspects of the system, a probation youth, a pregnant teen, a foster youth, who wanted to blow up the entire system, and instead represents the importance of one consistent, caring adult who never gave up on her, never judged her. And she, as she says, she went from testing at a third grade math level when she graduated high school to getting her master's in social work and now working from within to reform the system.
You know, those are the kinds of stories we're looking for. But in the end, casting is key.
Right.
For me, the best characters for documentary and for fictional films as well are people who are struggling.
Right.
And we look for people who wanted to be in the film because being in the film in some ways helped to make sense of their own life, help to, in some ways, it's therapeutic. Having sympathetic filmmakers validate their lives and validate the importance of what they're going through, I think is valuable. And then you find people, you know them when you see them. When you meet Jessica, you know that she's a person that so charismatic, so honest, and close to her feelings. And all the people that we met in the film were articulate, and they were willing to be open about their lives, and they were willing to trust us, and those are the most important things.
I want to thank Nick, Kate, Deborah, and Mark for sharing your time and bringing us your film.